So we will try to see, are there any prelims questions or mains questions hidden in these kind of articles, and where do we use it? So always measure an article in two ways. One is it related to any previous year question, right? Like, what is its shelf life? Shelf life means 6 months down the line. Okay, am I going to use this article? Is this article going to be in my memory for even 1%? So that should be your basic shelf mark, right? Honestly speaking, this article is not at all useful in the long run, but for slow burn continuation to prove that Taliban hasn't changed, their ways did not change. See, whom did they target? American soldiers. So America had an agreement with Taliban that American forces or American interests in Afghanistan will not be attacked. Taliban is not going to keep their word. In that way, just as a continuation of the story that you are reading from last 1 month, you read this article and you happily forget it. You understand it more than enough, right? Worst case scenario, we still have Hindus and Sikhs in Afghanistan who are supposed to be evacuated. Taliban is not allowing it. So back channel discussions will happen and things will come into the picture. So that is how you develop a hunch over a long period of time, because 6 months down the line, we don't want to spend again 5 or 10 minutes of our life making notes. Okay, Kabul airport, where is Kabul? Nothing doing, right? I hope none of you have done all such things. Just read it, skip it. So ultimate target is to complete the entire Hindu newspaper reading in 45 minutes after 6 months. So by the time you reach Feb 2022, you should be able to do this. Clear? Now, whereas it comes to this article, your judgment should have given you a long-term shelf life. What do I mean by that? This article can be used in social justice, right? Governance, even 6 months down the line. May not be in its entirety, but how you take this article. Both government of India and judiciary are very compassionate. So whenever a question arises, is system compassionate? Does system have a heart? You can think of such articles, especially COVID orphans. That is a keyword. We are not only talking about orphans, we are talking about COVID orphans. During COVID times, either of the parents have been killed by the COVID or both of them. What is happening to such children? Prime Minister has already announced a scheme. Yes. Now Supreme Court is asking, why don't you speed it up by taking funds from PM CARES Fund? Yes. Now, for prelims perspective, because you don't know, not now, maybe in March 2022 to 2022, you can make notes as PM Fund. What is PM Fund and what is PM Care? What is the difference between these two things? PM Cares does not have any statutory backing, whereas PM Funds have a statutory backing. Clear? So again, as I told you, not today, not immediately, but first of all, what are the different kind of funds? Yes, how are they different from each other? And compassionate governance, the last man in the line. So such kind of children needs to be taken care of immediately. So it's a straightforward article. It's easy to understand. Now, why is this article useful for long run? From birth to death, almost everything in this country is linked to Aadhaar card.
And PAN card.
Yes, Aadhaar card, especially Aadhaar card. PAN card may or may not be important, but soon, slowly, we will replace everything more or less with one single data entry point. That is Aadhaar. So think about the poor man, a very poor person. Okay, X needs to change his phone number or name, right? For some purposes, due to technical issues, if it is not working for last 1 week or so, technical glitches, there should always be alternatives. Okay, we will understand a simple story here. What is that simple story? Government of India sends money, welfare money, right, to X village. The money is supposed to be distributed to A, B, C, D, and E people. Okay, in reality, what happens? A exists, B exists. C, D, E are called as fictional characters. created by Sarpanch or his family members. Okay, in reality, CDE don't exist. All the money is siphoned off. This is one form of corruption. This is called as phantom beneficiaries. These are all real terms. Phantom beneficiary, right? Thanks to Aadhaar biometric verification, there are no more phantom beneficiaries. That means if A gets biometric, B puts the biometric, A and B are given the funds directly by the direct benefit transfer system through Aadhaar. Okay. Whereas CDE don't exist. You cannot create fake people, fake biometrics, right? So in this way, Government of India have saved more than 50,000 crores per annum thanks to Aadhaar card. Okay, that's a very nice example. But the problem is, let's imagine B is a very hard-working person. Okay, your intention is good. Your intention is to eliminate CDE, but B is a very hard-working person. He worked so hard that his what we call as fingerprint got diluted. Like his hands are so rough, right? His hands are so rough that biometric is not working probably. Okay, sometimes what happens in villages, you develop glaucoma and other issues where your iris is also not perfect for biometric verification. Such kind of people should not be kept outside of the system. B is a good person. B is a honest Indian. He needs to get the benefit of the Government of India. So somebody should verify his, let's say, voter card or white card or something manually and still give him benefits. First of all, try with Aadhaar. Okay, try biometric, try iris. If none of these things are working, then only go for alternative verification system. Right now, most of the times what is happening is, if Aadhaar is not working, we are not giving them the benefits. So that is in a way inconvenient for the real beneficiary, but good for government because CDE are eliminated. You understand? Yes. So that is why technical glitches may not affect us immediately, but for a person who is making bare minimum money or Narega wages, he has a lot of impact. Always think from the poorest man in the country, not from your perspective. You being a smart engineer, you might be thinking, okay, why will that happen? Why will iris not work? Or why will thumbnail not work? Okay, why will internet not work? Go to the remotest village in your state. Okay, talk to the poorest man you can find. Then if your policy is working for him, your policy is perfect. You may not include him on day 1, but day 25 you can definitely include him also. Clear? Next. So this is still an ongoing controversy. I will discuss it in a later stage. Just few days ago, we have discussed this article, right?
Yes, sir.
So there was an article by Faizan Mustafa about privacy, and I told Hyderabad has the largest, one of the largest CCTV cameras in the world. So Mr. Arvind Kejriwal is coming on proudly. He is claiming it as an achievement that Delhi tops the list of the cities with highest number of CCTV per square mile. So it's an achievement in governance level, definitely, because each and every square inch of the city is covered with CCTV camera. Every crime will be recorded. And one more problem with Delhi is Delhi being a floating city. That means huge number of migrants come from nearby state, from Punjab all the way till northeast. A lot of influx of population is there. So it's hard to maintain records. It's hard to keep an eye on each and every corner of the city. A lot of crimes are happening 24/7. Yes, Delhi is also unhealthily dubbed as rape capital of the world. So for all such things, CCTV cameras will reduce the crimes, right? Missing children, missing people, yes, mentally health, people with people who have mental health issues, they might be running away from the home. Such people can be identified using facial recognition technique. So in such ways, Delhi becomes very safe using this particular CCTV camera. But as I have mentioned earlier, the problem lies with misuse. Who is having access to this particular data? Is that person being thoroughly vetted? Yes, if some case has to be given, I mean, if some CCTV footage has to be checked, then is there a proper due process? If all these steps are checked and the data is secured, right, properly, then it is fine. And one more thing is, during Delhi riots, you don't know probably, or you know, both the rioters and police officials, both of them tried to destroy the CCTV cameras first. Okay, they want to do something. So it brings external accountability on all actors. So unlike earlier days, you cannot do a crime and get away with it, even the police officers also. Yes. So just keep that in mind, the number of CCTV cameras and how things will change in the system. Now, there is one more article. I am not sure whether this article is in Hyderabad edition or not. Online application for learners more than WV. Is this there? Now, this is mostly useful actually for GS paper 4 and GS paper 2. In GS paper 4, there is a concept called as citizen charter. So in ethics paper, there is a term called as citizen charter. What is citizen charter? If you go to a post office or RTO office, okay, if you apply your license, you will be given learner license in 24 hours. Okay, if you want to get a DD, you have to wait for 25 minutes. Like this, you might have seen a board in any of the government office, post office, banks. Such things are called as citizen charters. That means they will tell you that what is the time it will take for you to get your services. So here the term is services. Okay, public service delivery. So if you are a totally new person, you went to RTO office for license, you don't know how many days it will take the license to come. You have to talk to a broker, a driving school person. You have to give him 5,000 rupees or 10,000 rupees. Then he will get all the things done very smoothly. But if you don't go through a broker or a middle person, right, it feels like a maze. You have so many things to do, so many forms to fill. You have no clue. It's very confusing, right? Now, citizen charter actually empowers such citizens by telling them how, you know, what is the what are the forms that are required, where are those forms available, what is the time that is needed for you to get the license, etc., etc. This is an outdated concept. In spite of all the citizen charters in the world, the efficiency of government offices did not increase. So that is where the term compulsory or public service delivery bill have been introduced. That means if a person has given an application for learner license, okay, within 24 hours, if the learner license is not given to that particular individual, it is the responsibility of the government officer to tell the government why he was unable to deliver the license in 24 hours. So the responsibility, the onus is put on the public official, not on the citizen. Once you file an application, you don't have to follow up, sir, where is my license, or where is my water bill, where is my water connection. Okay, the burden is shifted to the government officer. Okay, in Delhi, what is happening is this public service delivery is taken to house delivery, a further step from citizen charter to public service delivery, from public service delivery to faceless services or door to door delivery, right? You can take to the laptop or computer. You can take to the laptop or computer, right, and file everything online, and you can get the service also online through online. So that's a much advanced public service delivery system. You don't have to visit any government office. Think how progressive it is. E-governance, digital governance, okay, public service delivery. In all the three places, you can use this article in the long run. So for GS paper 4 and GS paper 2 wise, it's a very good example. Understood all of you? Very simple concept. But you have to understand where we started. We started with citizen charter. Then we moved to public service delivery bill, right? Then now we are moving to faceless service initiatives. A day will come when most of us will never have to visit a government office for most of the services, for birth certificate, death certificate, water bill, water connection, as house connection, electricity connection. Everything will be linked to either Aadhaar, right, or through blockchain based documents. So once you upload all the documents in a blockchain based service, there is no worry for the government official or for you that it will be tampered. Yes. Again, it's being tested in so many places in the country, not only in Delhi, but Delhi is a very nice example. You know, I did tell you, most of you, right? Like I won't be accepting the you to the class after 6:40. There is a difference between an online class and an offline class. In offline class, if you come and go, okay, I won't be bothered. In online class, whenever someone comes after a particular amount of time, I have to pause, I have to, you know, go to that particular thing, accept, come back. It breaks the flow. After 6:40, if you are unable to connect because internet issues, or if you are so lazy to come before 6:40, please don't come to the class. Okay, watch the recorded video. This is the last time I'm going to tell all of you. If your internet connection is weak, get a 4G phone. Okay, tethering, do that at least for 1 hour of the class. For my class, the next class, you won't have any interruptions. Right. Again, whenever you hear such whenever you see such articles like Sambar Lake and all those things, first thing your mind should know is previous year question. Okay, as I told you, the first thing is get a printout of all the 4 GS paper copies, GS 1, 2, 3, 4. Take a printout, have it in your home, read it daily. Yes, do that, and then just see the previous year questions, at least from 2010 to 2020, all the prelims questions. Then you will notice a term called as Ramsar wetland sites. Right? What is Ramsar wetland site? It's a designated site given by a particular convention. Okay, that means that particular water body is very, very important. So prelims questions can be very trivial. Like they will give you 4 names, A, B, C, D. Sambar Lake, Chilika Lake, Hussain Sagar, okay, and some other. Hussain Sagar is yeah, and Koledo or some other lake. Okay, 4 names will be given. Which of these is a Ramsar wetland site? As of now, India has around 42 Ramsar wetland sites. You have to mug them up. Okay, slowly, not in one day. Slowly, you have to mug them up. You need to know which state it belongs to, right? And if some lake is repeatedly in the news, right? Then areas like whether it's a freshwater lake or a brackish lake, that means it's a saltwater lake or a freshwater lake. These kind of trivial data has to be remembered by you in prelims. Clear? Now, this is not the problem of Sambar Lake alone. This is universal problem. Almost all the lakes are being enroached. They are being occupied either for mining, either for construction purposes. Yes, lake sizes are coming down. It is leading to long term destruction. Just think about it. Sambar Lake is a world famous lake. Tourists from all over the world come to visit that. If such kind of lake can go through this process, right? Enroachment. Normal lakes, we don't even know what kind of destruction they are doing. Clear? So just remember, whenever you see a lake, most of the times it is about Ramsar wetland sites. This kind of data is available to you in Environment and Biodiversity Standard textbook. And one more thing I encourage you to do is don't Google. Okay, see my Google Assistant is active. Okay, don't Google. What do I mean by that? Today you heard about Ramsar wetland site. Okay, you Google it, you came to know about something, then that is your first revision. Then again, 10-15 days down the line or 3 months down the line, environment and biodiversity, you will Google it, you will read it in Google or in Wikipedia. The problem with this approach is you are not having one single source which you are repeating multiple times. There are 8 major subjects for prelims for polity, economy, geography, environment and biodiversity, and so on and so forth. Take one standard book, talk to any senior or Google it, right? Take one book per one subject and go back to the same book n number of times. As I told you, this Ramsar wetland site is available in environment and biodiversity standard textbook. You take a standard textbook, you read it once, second time, third time, fourth time when you're reading the same book, it becomes very, very easy, right? So this Google approach is instant solution, but for prelims, if you have to clear prelims in the long run, always go back to your static textbook, right? Face recognition cameras to be installed in railway stations at Maharashtra and Gujarat. So few days ago, same article, facial recognition system. So why are they using the facial recognition system? Railway stations are hubs for missing persons. So here we can link two things. One is trafficking. Kids from Bihar, Chhattisgarh, Jharkhand, and other places are kidnapped from their parents at a very young age, and they are used for all kind of things, either like a labor, sex trafficking, women trafficking, more or less same. Sometimes for organ transplantation, right? So for all such nefarious purposes, children are kidnapped. Especially they are found in railway stations. So if we have a very high, smart, sophisticated facial recognition system, so somebody complained in Chhattisgarh or Jharkhand, given that photo, this kid is found in Gujarat railway station, he will be automatically sent to Gujarat. So in such cases, it's a very good approach. Yes. So in prelims, most of the times what will happen is they will give you a technology and they will ask you applications. Right? For example, CCTV cameras can be useful for identifying criminals, identifying missing persons, right? To monitor body temperatures. Can a person with high fever be identified using CCTV cameras? So what about thermal screening cameras? So there is such thing called as thermal screening cameras, which will track you by your body temperature, right? So I'm this is not to test your knowledge or to tell you things. I'm just giving you an idea that prelims questions are actually based on application based. CCTV cameras. If I talk about facial recognition cameras, the answer will change. But if we talk about CCTV cameras, then probably yes. Okay. And systems are getting so sophisticated. If people are wearing masks, caps, okay, makeup, still the CCTV cameras are able to identify you and read you. The technology is getting better and better, right? And we should be happy that we are using such a latest sophisticated technologies in a way. When you become an IPS officer, you will feel all these things are paradise. You won't bother about right to privacy and all these things. Why? If some MP calls you or MLA calls you and says, there is a crime, you will be so happy that there is something called a CCTV camera. Yes or no? Think from an IPS point of view, think from a constable point of view. Your life gets so easy thanks to such kind of technologies, right? From a human right activist point of view or some privacy activist point of view, this is a nightmare scenario. But you, the future you who is an IPS, you'll be happy actually. Yes. Hmm. So Suhasini Haidar. Suhasini Haidar is a very famous foreign affairs correspondent. In Indian Express, there is a person called as C. Raja Mohan. To be honest, PSIR students, when you read GS paper 2, sorry, PSIR optional paper 2, these are the names you will hear time and again. Amitabh Kant, Suhasini Haidar, Raja Mohan, probably Constantino Xavier. These people are very common in this foreign affairs circle news. So you will use their names repeatedly. Suhasini Haidar said this, Suhasini Haidar said that, Raja Mohan said this. So did you learn anything new? Yes, she is the daughter of Subramanya Swamy. Yes. How is that information going to help us? Again, I knew, you knew, right? So apart from that important information that she is the daughter of the BJP leader Subramanya Swamy, anything important? This article reiterated that we need to follow strategic autonomy. Okay. So what is your major takeaway? Very good, Anuhya, you summarized it rightly. So the major crux is, if you remember, the theme is on the very first day our discussion is India has a very good soft power. That soft power has to bring some moral pressure. So the theme is, see again, we can watch silently, but we still have to bring that moral pressure. You don't have to engage with Taliban. As I told, you bring the women and children of Afghanistan as a centerpiece. You are in the UNSC body. India can take that advantage and signal saying, let Taliban do whatever they want to do. If they come into the power through legitimate means by elections and all those things, we will be happy. But for now, women and children of Afghanistan are the top priority of the entire world because of human right violations. So that should be the stand that India should be propagating. And take UN bodies as a platform to propagate that message. That is what she is saying. So this has been discussed. Right? And she says how Indian soft power has been invested in Afghanistan. If you see this particular paragraph, she says in last 20 years, India is the only country that probably bothered to invest some in these things, right? And we have a huge like capital, like infrastructure wise, and potentially soft power wise. In Afghanistan, people know India is their friend. So from all these things, we cannot suddenly walk away. So what to do? What to do is take UN bodies and take UN bodies and promote the message that always India did. Tell me one country which will argue against India if India says women and children of Afghanistan are to be a top priority, their safety is priority. Right? If Taliban is saying India is doing a bad propaganda and all those things, then just prove us wrong. Taliban is dying for international recognition and some kind of PR, right? So Taliban wants the world to see them in a different light, and we are putting pressure in the right places. So that is done through India's soft power, and it will also enhance India's soft power. And that is the uniqueness of India throughout. If America says human rights, people will laugh. Why? For 20 years, you have bombarded them, killed thousands of Afghanistan. India did not kill anyone. India never occupied anyone. Yes. So it's a very simple, straightforward article. UN bodies is the most important dimension there, and some keywords like regional arc, Trioka. Trio. No. So somebody was mentioning what is the summary, right? Multilateral, multi-stakeholder approach. So again, it's not even multilateral. It's like it's the responsibility of everyone. It's the moral responsibility of all the countries. See, South Korea is giving visas to Afghan people. Where is South Korea? Where is Afghanistan? What is their connection between them? Right? See, the problem with multilateral or multi-stakeholder approach is the moment you say Afghanistan, I have a vested interest, Pakistan have a vested interest, Russia has a vested interest, China has a vested interest. But we are not talking about vested interest, right? We don't want any stake. We are purely talking in the sense of moral responsibility. That moral pressure is something that will bury everyone. That moral pressure is that will bring US back, bring China into the front. China might announce some more funds, right? So it's you take it next level, take it to universal rights. Okay, just think about it. South Korea, small country, probably hard to find even in the map, but a very rich and powerful country, of course. But they are also giving visas to Afghanistan people because they feel it's their moral obligation. So being our immediate neighbor, we have to have more moral obligations. Now, this article is self-explanatory, but I will try to tell you. Schools are being reopened, right? And there is also a third wave. So there is a dilemma. See, again, the word dilemma is not a choice between two good options. The word dilemma is a choice between bad and bad options. Why it's bad and bad? I mean, less bad. Again, there are degrees of bad here. If you open schools, there is third wave, right? So children might be affected. If we don't, if you open the schools, wave might increase. Third wave might come and hit them, or this might lead to third wave. So it's very risky, but there is no other option. We have to open schools. Children have lost a huge amount of time in learning outcomes. Teachers are suffering because of lack of jobs. So it's a moral crisis. We have to open our schools. The most important thing we need to do is vaccinate everybody in relation to the school ecosystem. From bus drivers, cleaners, ayas, everyone, teachers, principals, at least all the children, right? We need to vaccinate them, and we need to understand which classes to be allowed, 6th class and above, or 6th class, even smaller classes. Why 6th class and above? Children might actually understand why to wear a mask. You cannot explain the importance of a mask to a 2nd class or a 3rd class children. He might drop it, he might lose it in the play. So there are many problems. So 6th class and above or 9th class and above, even bigger children, probably better immunity, right? So who will decide all these things? that is again a moral dilemma. That is totally up to the government. Now, we have to vaccinate them. There is no proper empirical data, but government has allowed this particular vaccine, right? Still field trials are going on. Once the trial results come out, we will have empirical data. That means we will have proof that this is actually working for children between the age group of 12 to 18. Then all of them have to be vaccinated. Only they have to be allowed, right? And school children are to be treated as priority. First and second doses should be completely done to all the students. Only then we should allow them. So what is the problem? The problem is, if we allow and if the cases increase or if the spread increase, everybody will blame the government. If we don't allow, then they are saying that children are not learning, our outcomes are falling behind, it's a loss to the nation, we should open schools. So if I open, I have a problem. If I don't open, I have a problem. If I open, how do I open it? Right? Education is again a state subject. In constitution, there are lists: union list, state list, and concurrent list. Within that, education comes under state list. So this is not a national policy. Should we bring in National Disaster Management Act to say every state should allow only 9th class and above plus children? What about the rest? So it is having a myriad of problems, right? Many problems. So that is why this editorial is discussing all these things in depth. Now, one more thing is, in rural area, probably we still have good ventilation system, or the schools are considerably open. In urban areas, the schools are not much so. They're in apartments. They don't have playgrounds. They have buildings surrounding them, right? It's like a totally closed schools, which is not safe for COVID protocols. So proper ventilation, good sunlight, free flow of air, all these things have to be there. Only such a school should be allowed. What about the rest? You understand the complications that are there in opening the schools, right? Again, please remember, this is all purely for theoretical discussion only. The moment schools are open, nobody will be bothered. So this is purely for intellectual and UPSC or academic purposes discussion. Because all of us know, in reality, if we have such high standards, probably few schools in the country will be open, and very few children will go to the schools. There will be a lot of confusion, chaos, headaches. So most of the times, what will system do? System will bury all these issues slowly. On September 1st, when schools are open, none of us will see any issues from parents or any school management. Everything will be going on. We have faith in God and we move forward. That is how things work. But in long term, we need to plan for better empirical approach. That means next time, if there is a COVID-like pandemic, the first people who will be vaccinated is probably school teachers and children. Proved that the vaccines are available. Clear? Any confusions there?
No, sir.
So who understood this particular article? This is just like the yesterday's judiciary and other areas article. If you remember that article I told you, when judiciary has to go for technology, police officials, data entry, OCR, a lot of things have to be digitized. Judiciary cannot alone. I mean, judiciary is having AI, but police are still living in pen and paper. That doesn't work. She is trying to tell the more or less the same thing. if a state has to go for digitization, or if data driven policy making should be made as the heart of the discussion, right? See, the entire article lies in this orange line. If government decisions are to be data centric, there is a need to ensure good, robust, and reliable databases. So, what is a database? There are, let's say, 100 departments in a state: water department, agriculture department, fertilizer department, uh, direct benefit transfer department, revenue department. There are so many departments. Each and every department has to have a standardized data entry procedure when all of them are linked to one huge database, or at least one usable database. That means a database set from this and this can be taken, and data centric governance can be delivered, right? That means unless and until there are no reliable database creation at the remote level, that means in a village level. Yesterday I told you example, right? Srinivas and Srinivas, two different names, same person, two different data sets, different numbers, okay, duplication of effort. So all these things have to be worked on. Only when once we start working on all this data collection and standardization, right, then the data driven policy making will make more sense. And second thing, data interpretation is always a difficult process, as she cites certain examples like in North India, in South India, or even in the case of literacy, yes, or fear. If I'm afraid of police officer, I will tell you a very simple and funny thing. Some, you might have traveled in train before COVID, right? In trains, this train attendants, they will bring you this feedback form, or sometimes in restaurants also. He will stand just beside you, okay, or he will fill most of the form and he will ask just to sign you. Have you faced such scenario? So such data sets cannot be taken as a face value. When server is standing there beside you, or the train attendant is standing beside you, okay, you humanly, are very sensitive. You won't say not satisfied, least satisfied. Human tendency is to tick the highest point, 5. Okay, done, all good. Even if it's the worst service, worst food you ever tasted in the train, okay, you will still give 5 marks. So when the feedback form is seen by a railway traffic service officer or someone, okay, he feels okay, everything is fine, everything is 5-star. But is it true data set? No, the customer does not have a freedom. In the same way, she brings this particular argument. If people are poor, illiterate, and they are afraid of the police behavior, okay, humanly they will not say, police are very brutal here, we are afraid of police officers. Only a educated, empowered city person probably will say, who, you are just a police officer, I know this, I know that. There will be a lot of drama. So for society has to be empowered in different ways for data sets to become more reliable, or you need to maintain, or you need to create such kind of anonymous data collection points where true data sets are entered into the system. What gets measured gets improved, right? Only when I come to know that police officers are not being friendly with the citizens in a particular zone, I will tell to the SP of that particular zone to sensitize his own cadre. As long as I don't have data, I will assume everything is fine, or manually I have to go there and do some surprise inspections. So for this country to go towards data driven policy making, we need to create that ecosystems where data is collected in a fair and usable manner, right? Next, data taking should be standardized. Right. When these two things are being done, that is when systems will get better. Clear? First of all, just understand what is data driven policy making. That's more than enough. That means, as I told you, in a particular panchayat, how many hospitals are there, how many doctors are there. Homogenization of various data sets with a single identifier. So that means, let's say Aadhaar card. Homogenization means, for example, yeah, It's a very trivial example, but I think you will understand it. Let's say politicians have to declare their assets. Okay, one person will declare, I have 1 kg of gold, right? The next person will say, I have 36,000 rupees value of gold. Right? Both of them are declaring about gold only. But if this person is also declaring, the value of gold he is holding in money terms, not in weight terms, right? That is when people will realize this person actually have more gold. So homogenization, that means you have to express it in one term, in one way. Then all of us should be able to understand that, see, this is one simplifying of data. Then whenever we are discussing about gold in this country, all of us has to discuss only it in the monetary terms. See, for example, the measurement of land. The measurement of land is sometimes expressed in square feet, yards, there are different terminologies, right? So all the data has to be streamlined and recorded in a simplest fashion. Again, see, this geographical boundaries will be broken down once you enter the data into a technological format, right? Okay, it doesn't matter where your territorial jurisdiction lies. For example, imagine all the black boxes that I'm drawing are police stations. Police station 1, police station 2, police station 3, and police station 4. Okay, in reality, there is something called as CCTNS, Crime and Criminal Police Tracking Network System. For CCTNS, this is all homogenized. That means it doesn't matter whether you are in station 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, or station 5, or station 6 or 7. Okay, for CCTNS, any FIR registered within these 7 stations is considered as one. That is homogenized, that is standardized, right? And the forms are same in all the 7 police stations. Okay, for physical, for geographical ease, to just have certain boundaries, police stations are divided into 7 stations. Technology, it treats as one big station, one big network. For physical use, 7 different stations. Clear? Right. Okay. I haven't even discussed this particular topic, so I don't want to discuss this particular editorial. It's about national monetization pipeline. We will have a discussion only about this in near future, probably in September 1st week or something. National monetization pipeline. Okay, so just keep this much in mind. National monetization pipeline has to be dealt in a individual fashion. Okay, not in this particular editorial. If I don't discuss this by September 1st week, please remind me, sir, you are supposed to discuss national monetization pipeline. It's a big topic. We will deal it differently. Now, so have anyone tried answer writing? When you read this particular editorial, the first and most important thing that you will notice is the person has written this article with a lot of passion. He actually loves and cares vultures. Isn't it the feeling that you got? You cannot write a mechanistic essay. This person actually truly believes each and every word that he is writing. You have read around 50-60 editorials in the last 2 weeks, right? But this editorial is more passionate. It talks from the heart, right? So a reader will always know whether the person is writing with a connect or not. This article is a very good example for answer writing. This is how you are supposed to write answers. He is nowhere talking about feelings, cushiness, emotions, and all those things, but still it will still stir emotions in you. He nowhere talks in emotional terms, compassionate, we have to be passionate towards culture, vultures, and all these things. But the moment you end this article, you, if you are, in a person in power, you will definitely invest more in taking care of the vultures. He's writing empirically, he's writing with facts, but at the same time, he's connecting with you at a different level. That is the power of good answer writing. Why is this very important? Because in GS paper 4 and in essays, and in most of the GS paper 1, 2, and 3, you will have to write in such a fashion. You have to connect with the examiner, and that connection comes only with believing, conviction. If you are writing an answer about corruption, I will know whether you actually believe corruption is a good thing or a bad thing. If you are just writing, emotionless corruption is this, throwing facts, automatically, believe me, examiner will know. If you as a reader without a lot of experience can know which article is more connective, which article is more impactful, okay, definitely examiner who has evaluated hundreds if not thousands of answers will know whether you are writing with conviction or not. Okay, you have to believe whatever you are writing, only then it will create such kind of impact. So if you haven't read this, please do read this particular article. It's very nice, simple, no need for elaboration as well. But for prelims point of view, you need to remember this term. There is something called as IUCN status, IUCN red list. Whenever an animal is under severe stress, it will be tested. That is called as critically endangered. Endangered, critically endangered, vulnerable, least concerned. There are different stages. You will find them in environment and biodiversity. Don't worry about this. But you have to remember which Indian vultures are under critically endangered list. UPSC will most of the times only ask about critically endangered list. So you don't have to remember each and every animal's name. But if a vulture, let's say 6 vultures of India are under critically endangered list, you need to know its name for prelims point of view. Right? And see, diclofenac has been banned, right? It's a previous year question, for example. So why do vultures die? Vultures die because of diclofenac, which will lead to renal failure, that is kidney failure. Thing here is behavioral change. Okay, so here he talks about bad omen. We don't only talk about vultures, we talk the same about owls, bats, right? So bats and owls are still considered as bad omens in many homes in India. Whenever you see a owl, okay, they say this is a bad place. Owls, bats, bad places. But what are they doing? They are cleaning the vermin. They're reducing the pests, right? They're actually helping the society. The same is case with vultures. See, Parsis, the Parsis have this high tower, right? Death tower, where dead bodies are left for the vultures. They don't burn or bury. Parsi culture encourages them to leave the dead bodies for the vultures. So human animal connect can be totally on a different level. Parsi tower. Right? Yes. So again, it's giving back to the nature. So that connect between nature is very different. So that is what he talks about vulture restaurants also. Whenever you go there, you throw out all the carcasses, right? It will help them recover. So behavioral change is more important here rather than anything else. People have to understand that vultures, owls, bats, and all these things, at least owls and vultures are there to help them, not to destroy them. Then automatically conservation methods will increase, and superstition method reasons like rhino horn have disease curing properties, vultures have disease curing properties, and all these things are not going to help anyone, right? Yes. So I think we have discussed lot many articles than we used to. Slowly, we are increasing the number of articles that we are able to discuss. Hopefully soon we will cover even more articles. Only 1 or 2 articles I have left. Tomorrow we will cover them. See you all tomorrow.